left a party for an hour with a friend. He got suspicious and tracked me down. I never imagined that a single choice would completely mess up my life like this, but now I find myself staring at the broken leftover of my priceless life. And all of it happened because I left a party for just 1 hour. My name is Emily, and my husband, Mark, is the best partner anyone can wish for in a lifetime. He's very dependable, loving, and very protective, if I may say so, to the point of being overprotective. We have been legally bound for 5 years now, and I love this man to bits, but sometimes I feel suffocated. Mark loves order, schedules, and planning, and I am more of the type that loves the seat of the pants. Sometimes we are stronger in numbers due to our differences, yet sometimes it is the unspoken rift that exists, and neither of us really addresses. Mark was at the home of a coworker who was hosting a New Year's Eve event. During the celebration, friends, family, and a few unidentified guests had occupied every available space in the house. The celebration throng created a joyous mood in the party space with the thrill of drinking glasses, loud laughter, and exploding fireworks. Mark demonstrated his social skills by interacting with his coworkers throughout the business meeting. That's when Jake walked in. It had been years since I had last laid my eyes on Jake, and as soon as I saw him, everything returned once again. Once we were just friends in the university, and there was always the tension that things could be more between us. We had graduated and drifted apart. He had relocated, and it was the first time I met him during that eventful night. Before he headed straight for her, the young woman awakened a bright smile on his face. "I nearly didn't know you." Thus, we embraced, and we could speak without interrupting one another and without stopping. He inquired about my life, job, and as anticipated, Mark. I merely presented him, and though they exchanged polite handshakes, Mark was essentially calculating the man. Jake had gained the confidence and the quick wit of a man who could carry a room just with a charm. And while he did not have any ill intentions, Mark went on feeling uncomfortable with him being around. Eventually, the chaos inside the packed room led Jake to suggest going outside for a visit. He gestured toward the busy living area to express his uneasiness due to the room's noise. "Let's go for a short drive. You'll get home in no more than 10 minutes. I kept myself paused so that I could see what Mark was doing at that time. He was on the other side of the room engaged in a conversation with someone else, but he had never stepped his gaze off me all night. Well, I wasn't harming anyone, I said to my conscience. Jake was an old friend, so there was nothing that could go wrong. It was just a drive. Harmless. I walked over to Mark to let him know. It's time for Jake and I to go outside, only to catch up. The look on Mark's face changed on the spot. His smile faded, replaced with a sort of masking expression that could either be doubt or concern. "Are you going to leave the party?" I tried to seem indifferent and said it in a casual way. "Since we haven't met in a couple of years, we must leave the noisy location. I will return shortly." He paused and his lips came towards me while he turned his attention towards my face. "Very well," he replied, but this was clearly expressing so much anger and annoyance. "Make it quick because you don't have much time." I looked at his right cheek and kissed it, ignoring a nagging feeling that was creeping up my back. As I stepped through the door, I noticed Mark observing us with a glare that worried me. I felt both excited and anxious during that little time outside in the chilly night air. The last time that I spent time one-on-one with Jake was years ago, and as much as I kept telling myself that the intention was to only catch up with him, the small voice in the back of my head warned me to go back. However, I didn't. When we entered Jake's car, I tried to dissuade myself that there was no harm in this, as it was but a ride down memory lane. I never imagined that getting into the car would so drastically change the course of my life. Since our connection has always been smooth, I characterize the interaction as a straightforward discussion between two longtime friends. Through the faint sound of his motor and the faint smell of his cologne, the electrical connection between us became apparent. Jake began to speak about himself and his work, the places he has been to, and said he wished to be back in college when we were best friends. I simply smiled and continued to bob my head in agreement, even though my thoughts were, unfortunately, far from the discussion. His remarks triggered an unseen recollection from aspects of myself that I had ignored for far too long. We were stranded outside of our apartment building that night, unable to get inside. Jake said, laughing, "You were so mad at me for forgetting my key card." I laughed too, shaking my head while saying that. "That's right, or as I said, I wasn't mad at you. I was mad at the freezing wind. I wouldn't have turned into a popsicle without you. I was so engrossed in the discourse that I failed to realize how my shields were eroding. Jake gave me a friendly but curious look. You haven't changed a bit, Emily. Still just as beautiful and full of life as you were back then. He thought me out of my usual self, gave me a nice compliment, which I never expected, and the redness of my cheeks was evident. Jake, stop, I said, laughing as I tried to shrug off the sting of his words, which shouldn't have hurt as much as they did. Mark's face flashed in my mind, his steady presence, his warm smile. I loved him. I knew that. But Jake's attention felt different. It wasn't the familiar comfort I had with Mark. It was thrilling, almost intoxicating. Well, how has married life been to you? Jake queried in a rather laid-back manner, yet accompanied by curiosity. It's good, I replied quickly, maybe too quickly. Mark is great. He's steady, reliable. Jake raised his eyebrows. Stable? This sentence doesn't really have a good effect. I laughed nervously, brushing it off. You know what I mean. He's a good man. Jake did not pursue the matter any further, but the smirk stayed on his face. The manner in which he checked me over caused a stir in my heart, and I loathed the feeling. Jake parked the car close to a street lamp's glow when his car turned onto an empty street. He chose to pull over because he thought it would be simpler to talk without background noise. I was surprised, and after moments I swallowed hard, thinking that would be me soon. This wasn't wrong, I thought to myself. It was just talking. We started with our memories by exchanging stories about our former buddies, recalling our crazy evenings and treasured private moments. As he told me a story with great enthusiasm, his hand suddenly touched mine. The touch hit me differently, and it really made me feel special. Emily, he said, why are you not with your friends? When I heard the question, do you ever think about what might have been? I gave up on the relationship for a long time. That one question that really hit me again. I hesitated, searching for suitable words to answer. My heart was beating so fast at that time, so I turned my head away from what was happening. I was fully conscious that the path I was walking in was extremely dangerous, but a part of me couldn't deny the allure of his words. I was so overwhelmed with emotions that I sat there motionless when my phone vibrated in my bag. I was suddenly awoken from my dream world and hastily pulled it out. It was Mark. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the answer button, but I didn't pick up. I told myself I'd call him back in a minute, that he'd understand. I put the phone face down on the dashboard, ignoring the guilt that was starting to creep in. Jake pulled up a bit. He spoke even lower than before. You owe yourself happiness, Emily. I hope you know that. I am happy, I said, though my voice sounded shaky even to me. Then there was complete silence, the kind that puts a cultural weight and a cultural baggage on the people's head. Jake had placed his hand on the console between us, and though it wasn't touching my palm, I could still feel its heat. I did not shift mine, but I did not push it away as well. Back at the party, Mark was growing restless. He had to check his watch because I had been gone for 30 minutes. He became increasingly uneasy and suspicious when he realized that I had not returned any of his calls. He searched for the number on the phone and decided to call again, walking while he was dialing the numbers since no one answered the phone. There was something wrong about it, and Mark was not the kind of man who would disregard his instincts altogether. In the car, I was having difficulties with myself. Jake hadn't done anything wrong, but just being around him made me feel something I hadn't felt in years: passion and desire, attraction. At this, Jake looked at my phone when it rang once more. Then he chuckled. He's persistent, huh? Cheering glumly, I reached for the phone and switched it off. I lied, knowing that the words were painful to say. He worries too much, I said. Jake relaxed back to the chair, and his smirk disappeared as well. I don't want to give you a hard time, Emily. But I also do not like to remain silent when I have something to say about the matter. My imaginations were racing as I stood there. I was unable to reverse this moment or cross this line, but I was even more torn than ever as Jake's comments remained in the atmosphere. And at that moment, I never realized how soon everything was going to collapse. We drove to an empty street on the outside of the neighborhood, far from the bright streetlights and the noise of the party. All that was heard was the growl of the car engine as Jake finally came to a stop behind the cover of a big tree. The situation was so calm, even restricting, that everything around itself appeared to feel that something was about to happen. Jake said, "This is better," and switched off his car's engine. No distractions. Despite my inability to speak, I nodded. My heart pounded in my chest, and my thoughts were racing. A part of me begged for him to take me back to the party, to inform Mark, to get out. I didn't move, though. Jake turned to me and relaxed back in his chair. He looked at me intently, as if he were trying to figure out the solution to a question he hadn't yet answered. "You look stressed," he remarked quietly. I pretended that everything was okay, but my hands shivering disproved that. The conversation started off innocently enough. We talked more about our college experiences, friends we had lost touch with, and the types of folks we had grown into. However, Jake's voice softened to nearly whisper as he moved in farther away, changing his tone of voice. He started by saying, "After we graduated, I would make decisions about you every moment of the day." I blinked, caught off guard. "Jake?" He fixed me with his full attention and replied, "I'm serious. You were special to me, and I never told you because I didn't want to mess things up back then. However, I was always curious about what may have occurred if I had." He delivered a gut punch. I didn't know how to respond or what I should say. A part of me that was gratified and turned on wanted to keep going, even though the inside of me was shouting for me to stop. "Jake, I'm married," I finally shouted out nervously. "I know," he said, his voice filled with sadness. "Furthermore, I'm not want to get rid of it. I simply want to let you know." We were motionless for a minute. The state of silence between us was heavy with sentiments and unspoken things that I wasn't ready to admit. Then Jake leaned forward ahead of me to stop him. He moved slowly and hesitantly, as if he wanted me to take my time. However, I didn't. For an instant, I hesitated as I touched his lips. My brain begged me to pull over, shove him away, get toward the car, and never turn around. But I gave him a kiss in response. However, it was a lot to ruin everything. Guilt swept over me like a wave as soon as it happened. I jumped, and my hands moving my breath labored. I am unable to," I said. Impossible to hear myself. Jake sat back with a blank look. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I shouldn't have—" "No," I stopped nervously. "You are not to blame. I allowed it to happen." The number of calls that were missed appeared on the screen as my phone beeped once again. Mark had been phoning repeatedly. I became anxious when I realized how long we had been gone. Jake started to look at my phone. "You should answer that," he said. I ended the call by shaking my head. As I said, "I'll call him later." I was aware of how foolish it sounded. Jake reached out and his hand touched mine. "I don't want to cause you any problem, Emily, whether this was a mistake or not." "It was a dumb mistake," I answered quickly, cutting him off. I would not have had no idea of anything I was considering. However, that was actually inaccurate. I was thinking about how Jake made me feel, how he reminded me of a version of myself I hadn't been in years, a version that wasn't tied down by routines and responsibilities. However, that wasn't an argument. I thought about Mark's expression, and the knowledge of what I had done hit me like an enormous amount of rocks. I adored him. I appreciated our time together, and I would risk everything in a single thoughtless minute. "I must go back," I said, my voice faltering. Jake turned on his car and acknowledged. The relationship that existed between us was evident on the unspoken trip home. As I tried to decide what I was going to say to Mark, my mind was racing. How do I let him know that I didn't answer his phone? What has caused my unexpected absence? Jake put his hand on my arm before we drove up to the party, but I yanked him away. "I'm sorry," he said in a whisper. I was unable to even look at him. "Just don't," I said, almost raising my voice. I could feel the impact of what I had done pressing down on me as I stepped out of the car. My gut was pinched with humiliation, and my heart felt terrible. I wanted to cry out loud, to scream in order to undo anything somehow. But I believed that it was too late. Searching for Mark, I walked inside the gathering. When I ultimately caught sight of him, he was talking to someone, but his eyes instantly turned to me. He had a relieved and angry look on his face, and I recognized then that my evening was far from done. As I walked up to him, he said in a low, piercing voice, "Where have you been?" I tried to sound informal as I said, "Just checking together." Mark narrowed and looked at himself. "For an hour? You didn't answer my calls." The look on his face told me he wouldn't trust any of the excuses I was desperately trying to think of. There was every reason for him to be suspicious. I sensed the distance between us growing as the evening went on. Mark's demeanor shifted. He was quieter, more withdrawn. And I knew that this was just the beginning. The consequences of my actions were starting to become apparent, and they couldn't be undone. I couldn't go back since I was already too far. The trip back to the party felt like it went on forever. I couldn't stop checking my phone because my heart was racing. Mark's missed calls stared back at me like a running clock as the upcoming encounter drew near. I told myself I could explain it, that I could smooth things over, but deep down, I knew better. What I didn't know was that Mark wasn't waiting at the party anymore. Back at the house, Mark had reached the limit of his patience. 30 minutes turned into 40, then an hour. His gut told him something was wrong. He'd tried to brush it off, convincing himself I'd lost track of time or that Jake was just an old friend. But the more he thought about it, the more the doubt crept in. When I didn't answer his fifth call, he couldn't take it anymore. He borrowed a friend's car, using the excuse of needing to grab something from home, but his mind was made up. He opened the location tracker we'd set up on each other's phones, something we'd both agreed to when we got married, more for safety than anything else. The dot on the map wasn't at the party. It was somewhere else entirely, somewhere quiet and out of the way. Mark's chest tightened as he gripped the driving wheel, all the scenarios that could go wrong racing through his mind. Jake's car was stopped beneath a faint streetlight when Mark arrived. He didn't even blink. He put the car in park, slammed the door, and stormed towards us. I started by hearing his rapid, heavy footfall crunching on the gravel. Then there was the piercing, irate knock on the window. "Emily." Mark's voice was like nothing I'd ever heard before, loud, raw, and filled with a mix of anger and hurt. "You have to get out of the car. Now." Every part of me stopped as I stood still, Jake's cheeks pale as he glanced at me. "Is that—" I said, "It's Mark," and my breathing was barely coming out. Jake reached for the door to deal with, but Mark pounded on the window once again before he could open it. "Don't make me say it repeatedly." I struggled to remove my seatbelt, my hands shaking. With a sigh, I wrenched the vehicle door open and climbed out, my legs trembling with such strength that I thought I was about to fall over. "Mark, I don't," he replied, with his voice quivering with rage. He glanced back and forth between Jake and me, his jaw so tightly clamped that I thought he may break his teeth. What on earth is going on here? "It's not what you may think," I murmured quickly, my words sounding phony to me. "Oh, really?" he shot back, raising his voice. "Because what it suggests is my wife sneaking away with another man in the dead of midnight and not accepting my call." With his hands up in an attempt to calm the noise, Jake exited the car. "Mark, listen." "Do not dare." Mark spat, his rage directed at Jake. "You have no right to attempt to argue for." "Nothing happened," I screamed out in an unstable voice. "We were just talking. That's all." Mark's laugh was cold and bitter. Talking? For over an hour? In somewhere in the middle of nowhere? His fists clenched at his sides as he shook his head. "Emily, what do you think, I'm dumb?" "No, obviously not," I said, my eyes welling with tears. "I promise it wasn't that way. I lost perspective of time because I had to catch up to him." "You lost track of time?" Mark repeated what I had said, and his voice cracked. "Do you even hear yourself right now?" An adjacent dog-walking pair halted, turning their attention in the direction of the commotion. As they whispered to one another and stared at us as if we were a circus, I was feeling the blush of shame creeping up my neck. Jake took a step forward, his voice level yet commanding. "I am the one accountable for this, Mark. You should be furious with me if you're going to be angry with anyone." Mark yelled, "Oh, believe me." His eyes slanted into slits. "I am furious with you. However, don't act as though you're the only person at fault in this situation." Jake paused, first glancing at Mark and then at me. "Look, I'm sorry, Guy. I had no intention of this happening." "Get out!" Mark snarled, his voice so piercing it sliced through the darkness like a blade. Jake glanced over at me once more, remorse written across his features. Then he nodded, said a subdued, "Sorry," and climbed back into his automobile. The rumble of his engine and the crunch of his tires on the gravel filled the stillness as he pulled away, leaving me with Mark alone. I made a trembling step towards him, but he raised his hand, halting me. "Don't," he warned, his voice low and shaking. "Don't you dare try to approach me at this moment." "Mark, please," I pleaded, crying tears down my face. "It was a mistake. I wasn't thinking." "You weren't thinking?" he interrupted, his voice rising again. "No, you were thinking. You thought about leaving the party with him. You thought about ignoring my calls. You thought about lying to my face. You knew what you were doing, Emily." "I didn't hurt you on purpose," I said, my voice breaking. "But you did," he yelled, his hands rising in anger. "You didn't just hurt me, Emily. You embarrassed me. You made me look like a jerk." His words struck hard, every one of them landing like a punch to the stomach. I couldn't dispute him. He was correct. Mark walked back and forth, raking his hands through his hair. "Do you even know what you've done? Do you even care?" "Of course I care," I cried. "I love you, Mark. I don't want to lose you." He halted his pacing and stood facing me, his eyes burning with anger and hurt. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this." I parted my lips to speak, but nothing emerged. What was I supposed to say? There was no explanation, no apology that could reverse the damage. The dog-walking couple disappeared from view, but I could still sense their censure hanging over me. Mark shook his head, his tone dropping to one of cold, clinical detachment. "I can't do this now. I need space." "Mark, please," I whispered, but he did not glance back. He closed the door of the borrowed car behind him and pulled away with the roar of the engine ringing in my ears. He left me alone on the corner under the faint street lamp, my heart broken into 1,000 pieces. I remained there for what seemed like hours, the realization of what occurred becoming more and more evident. My marriage was dissolving before me, and I had only myself to fault. As Mark's car vanished into the distance down the street, I felt as if the ground I was standing on had disappeared along with it. I remained planted where I was, unable to believe what was happening. The air was thick, and my chest hurt with a bout of panic and regret. I tried to call him, my fingers shaking as they moved over the phone's keypad. The phone rang, but he didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. Every unanswered call stung, a reminder that maybe I had pushed him too hard. My heart pounded as I tried to decide what to do. Go back to the party? Wait here? I didn't know where to begin cleaning up the mess I'd made. Finally, I ordered a rideshare to bring me home. The ride seemed to last forever, my mind racing with each second. I couldn't help but replay Mark's face in my head, the way his face contorted with pain and anger. I wanted to scream, to cry, to do anything to erase the suffocating guilt. And then, when I finally got back home, the lights were on. My stomach did a flip. Mark was at home. I walked in, and the sight froze me to the spot. Mark was inside the bedroom, a duffel bag across the bed, while he stuffed clothes into it with no second thought in my direction. His motions were swift, purposeful, as if he couldn't hurry out of there quickly enough. "Mark, please," I replied. He refused to look at me. "Don't," he said bluntly. "Just don't." I reached for him, urgency driving me to get him to listen to me. "I know I did something stupid. I know I hurt you, but can we just talk about it? Please, Mark." And then he finally turned to me, and the expression in his eyes gave me a shiver. They were no longer angry. They were cold, detached, as if he'd already made up his mind that I wasn't worth the trouble. "Discuss what, Emily?" he asked, his voice serene but flavored with acerbity. "How did you leave a party with another man? How did you ignore my calls? Or perhaps how I discovered you parked in the middle of nowhere, appearing as if you were going to destroy everything we constructed together?" Tears rolled down my face as I attempted to reply. "It wasn't like that. Nothing happened. I just—" "Stop lying," he interrupted, his voice rising. "Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I don't know what I saw?" "I'm not lying," I cried. "I love you, Mark. I was wrong, but it didn't count for anything. It's you I want. It's always been you." Mark laughed, a hollow sound, and shook his head. "If it's always been me, then why did you get into that car? Why did you let him get close enough to even think about it? You don't just make a mistake like that, Emily. You made a choice." His words sliced through me like a knife because I knew he was correct. There was no defending what I'd done, no explanation that would convince him otherwise. "I didn't mean to hurt you," I replied. "But you did," he growled back, his voice cracking. You hurt me in ways I never even thought were possible. Do you have any clue how it felt to be standing there, watching the woman I've given everything to cheat me like that?" I couldn't answer. I had no idea what to say. With a harsh sound, Mark closed his bag and turned around to face it. He said, "I'm leaving for a short while. I'm unable to stick around anymore. I'd rather not even look at you." I moved closer and begged, "Mark, don't go." His eyes did not contact mine as he moved away. "You should have looked at these things before you went alongside him." He simply had to do that to grab his luggage and leave, leaving me standing alone in the abandoned home. The quiet was deafening. As I started to cry, I fell onto the couch and covered my face with my hands. I was reminded of him by the whole home, the framed pictures on the walls, the coffee cup he used every morning, and the blanket we squabble over on movie nights. When I closed my eyes, memories came back to my mind. His anxious smile as he waited for me at the cross on our wedding day, which was our special day. How he had always been there, always solid, and held my hand during tough times. The late-night discussions about our future and our aspirations to get old together. I kept on thinking that how can I make it happen? I thought about Jake and my feelings for him, the excitement and emotion that had confused my judgment, but it was fleeting, meaningless. And now I had traded years of love and trust for a moment that didn't even matter. Through the night, I cried as I felt all of my mistakes. I was an empty shell by dawn, devoid of all emotions but feelings of regret. Mark came back 2 days later. Hoping he was here to make changes, I ran to the hallway as soon as I heard the door open, but that hope was quickly dashed by the look on his face. He hadn't come back to apologize. He had come to get more of his possessions. "Mark," I started, but he held up a hand to stop me. "I'm not actually here to fight with you," he replied. "I just need a few things." "Please, can we talk? Just for a minute?" I pleaded. With a sob of relief, he put down the package he was holding. "Emily, what are we there to discuss?" "It was not really a choice," I replied. "It was a mistake. Can't we work this out? I know I seriously injured you. Can't we at least try?" Mark shook his head, his jaw tightening. "Fix it? How do you fix trust, Emily?" I tried to make him comfortable, but he pulled me away. "I love you," I replied. Turning back, Mark picked up the package and made his way to the door. He turned to look at me again as he left. He was in such a bad mood, like he literally showed that he is not in a mood to talk to me at all. I honestly think that he did deserve better. I sat on the floor, staring at the empty space where he'd stood. The life we'd built together was gone, and it was all my fault. There was no one else to blame, no way to rewrite what had happened. All I had left was the stupidity of my choices and the realization that I'd destroyed the best thing I'd ever had. And for what? Just for a moment of attention, a rush of excitement that meant nothing in the end. As I sat there, I knew one thing for certain. I had no one to blame but myself. Update. Hi, Reddit. I'm really missing my life. The house feels emptier than ever, even though all the furniture is still here. Every corner whispers memories of the life we built together, the laughter, the love, the plans for the future. Now it's just silence. Deafening, suffocating silence. I sit on the couch, staring at the picture frames on the wall. Our wedding photo, a weekend trip to the mountains, the goofy selfie Mark insisted we take after assembling the world's most complicated bookshelf. Each one feels like a cruel reminder of everything I threw away. I don't deserve forgiveness. I know that. I traded love and loyalty for a fleeting thrill, a moment that meant nothing in the end, and now I'm left with nothing but regret. Mark was my partner, my rock, my future, and I ruined it because I couldn't see the value of what I had until it was gone. If you're reading this, please don't make the same mistake I did. Don't let a moment of weakness destroy years of trust and love. It's not worth it. I don't know what comes next for me, but one thing is clear. I'll carry this regret for the rest of my life.